Our next founder is Ira Allen. Now, Ira Allen is not nearly as famous as his brother, Ethan Allen. Now, Ethan Allen gets a lot of credit as a leader of the Green Mountain Boys and a soldier in the American Revolution, taking Fort Ticonderoga. There was a chain store named after him that at least was in the Northeast. I don't know if there was an Ethan Allen by you. I think they sold furniture. I'm not sure. Ira Allen, also just as important to the creation of Vermont, though he doesn't do the wartime heroics, so he doesn't get that thumbs up light shined on his special times. Ira did move with his brother to Vermont about the same time, when it was still like being debated, are we New York, are we New Hampshire, are we our own thing? Ira Allen does help form the Green Mountain Boys, but once the war breaks out and the Green Mountain Boys go out to do the fighting, well, there is some necessary things that have to happen at home. And Ira Allen is the one they decide stays back and organizes Vermont. Not only does he organize Vermont, but he's organizing Vermont while everyone else doesn't think there's a Vermont. At this point, he is one of the important people when Vermont declares independence from Great Britain and the other colonies, and technically, according to Vermont, they were their own nation. According to everyone else, they were not. But I like to say they were their own nation. So he ends up becoming the first treasurer and first surveyor general of the independent nation of Vermont, and later almost state of Vermont. And he spends over a decade in both of these positions. These are very important. First of all, treasurer during the founding of a state and during a wartime. Controlling the money is vital to how things are organized and operated. And furthermore, survey general at a time when New Hampshire was claiming it was part of the New Hampshire grants and New York was claiming it was part of New Hampshire, figuring out boundaries was amazingly important. Additionally, you got British French Canada on the northern border that also had to be resolved. So eventually, Allen is actually sent by Vermont to the Continental Congress. Now, he is not a Continental Congress delegate because the Continental Congress did not recognize Vermont as a colony or a state. You know, they didn't want to get involved in that debate between New Hampshire and New York that New Hampshire and New York were having, excluding the people who actually lived in the area who considered it Vermont. But he does go to the Continental Congress. He tries to plead for Vermont to be recognized. And again, this is unsuccessful. But he meets William Samuel Johnson of Connecticut. William Samuel Johnson, another important founder who would go to the Constitutional Convention, just a really important guy. He sympathizes with Vermont, who, by the way, Connecticut also claimed Vermont because it was on the Connecticut River. It does go up there, but absolutely no one took that seriously. But William Samuel Johnson sympathizes with Allen and Vermont, and he agrees to represent Vermont in the Continental Congress. Technically, he was only there representing Connecticut, but unofficially, he was also looking out for Vermont. So again, Ira Allen gets a Continental Congressman to represent their home during the debates. Again, it's a second thought for for Johnson and everyone else, but still, it's done. Allen goes home and then does a little artwork, and he designs the Great Seal of Vermont, which Vermont still uses to this day, the Great Seal of Vermont. It's at this point that Ira becomes involved in the Haliman Affair. And the Haliman Affair is extremely interesting. I should probably make a video about it all on its own, but in brief, essentially, the British, apparently, and this is done in secret, so we don't have a lot of documentation to really verify what happened here, but essentially, the British contact Vermont, and they propose, hey, Vermont, we understand the Americans aren't treating you very good. How would you like to become a part of Quebec? What? Quebec, you say? Yeah. They approach Vermont, and now both Ira Allen and some other leaders, including Ethan Allen, apparently had a bit of a quiet conversation with this. Now, it seems the argument made by Allen and the other Vermonteers was, hey, we were just playing with the British as a bargaining chip to get America to recognize us as a state. Obviously, you got Ira Allen, Ethan Allen, Seth Warner, although Seth Warner was on the other political spectrum and not involved in the Haliman Affair. But you have these, these leaders of Vermont who really want to be recognized as a state, and America just won't even bring it up in the conversation. So they were using the idea that the British are going to let us be our own state. We're going to be part of Quebec, but we'll be our own state. What do you think, America? And everyone in America was like, what are you doing? Stop it. And essentially, it fizzles out. Nothing comes of it. But it is a very interesting little side. And anything with the title Affair in the American Revolution, I am slightly partial to. So, eventually, the Revolutionary War ceases hostilities, and Ira Allen, who has accumulated, even before this time, moved to Vermont because he had purchased a whole bunch of land. He actually ends up donating a gigantic portion of land and investing seed money to create what would later be known as the University of Virginia. And that's why the article actually titles him the father of the University of Virginia. That is the thing he is best known for, despite all the other stuff I've just mentioned. He ends up becoming, he leaves his positions in the government, but by 1791, Vermont does become the 14th state, the first state that wasn't a colony. And Ira Allen does live to see this. Now, he ends up going to Vermont. He ends up going to France after this to purchase guns and ammunition to supply the Vermont militia. Of course, Vermont is on the border with British Canada. Unfortunately, he is actually captured, and this is much later on, closer to the War of 1812. He's actually captured by the British, and he is imprisoned in England with his supply for a brief time, but the supplies he purchased were held in Britain for 8 years. Now, after a long battle, Ira Allen is finally rewarded his guns and ammunition. It's finally sent back to Vermont, but because of the great expense he went to purchasing this, the time he spent in prison, and the fact that while he was overseas, a lot of the agents he entrusted with his property mishandled his finances, he ends up being broke. He even goes to a debtor's prison in Bennington for a short time, at which point he skips bail and flees. He leaves his adopted homeland that he's lived in for decades. He goes to Philadelphia because he hopes to correct his financial situation, but he falls ill and passes away shortly thereafter. And sadly, he's actually buried in an unmarked grave in a yard that has since been paved over. So, one of the most important and underappreciated founders of Vermont, American founders, founder of the University of Vermont, finds himself receiving the least ceremonial death and burial that you might get. Of course, there were soldiers who just left on the field. That's not, certainly not better. But Ira Allen is a fascinating character who unfortunately is not given the credit he deserves now, and was not given the credit he deserved when he passed away. So hopefully we've remedied that a little bit today. I sure hope you enjoyed this brief overview of the life of Ira Allen.